I'm really happy to be able to do a garden update for you and give you some of my favorite tips for success gardening, especially if you're out here in the desert, and also how to have a really awesome tomato yield this year. I have been growing tomatoes since I was a little child. That was my very first crop that I started with, and I'm so glad that I did. And I've come a long way, and I'm happy to share just some few simple things with you that'll help you out with your tomato crop this year. Well, welcome to my early summer garden. If I can get a good angle without glare, that would be good. So you can see I have pretty much a jungle going on here of so many mixed types of squashes. There's red curry squash, there's butternut squash, there's regular sugar pumpkin in there. But what we really want to talk about today are tomatoes. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing differently with my tomatoes this year that is just working so well. You can see here I have 2 tomato plants here, and they have actually branched out into 4 before I can get to them in time. But what I'm doing is single stalks, and it still worked out really well, even though they branched at the base. And if you look closely, you can see I have string wrapped around them. You can use different techniques for this. You can use plant Velcro, a wider tape, but string is working really well for me. The key is to have it tethered on something that is not going to move on you, because these tomato plants get heavier and heavier as they go up. So the reason behind a single stalk is because what your tomato plants do is they do a leaf, and then a fruit. Leaf, leaf, fruit, leaf, leaf, fruit. And anything that comes in the middle, you can see I pinch it off there, that's a sucker. So when they come through like that, you just pinch them off with your finger. And you can see some are coming up there. I'll go around so I can get a closer look for you. All right, so right here, we can see right here in the crook is a sucker getting started. And this is another interesting phenomenon, and I'll show you a different view of another one where I can tell the difference. But this tomato plant has actually legitimately forked right here. Right now, these look exactly the same. They both have fruiting stalks on them. So what I'm waiting to see, since I can't tell which one has the most fruiting, though I'm thinking it might be this one, I'm going to see which one's the biggest and the strongest, and the other one has got to go because it's stealing from the energy of the tomato plant. So I have several different varieties here. I've got Early Girl, cherry tomatoes, as well as a Polroma. And each one is looking a little bit different, as you would imagine a different variety, and responding to the heat in different ways. So right where I am, I'm in a subtropical desert zone. So this tomato, you can see the curling leaves. This is actually not a bad thing. Think of the leaves kind of like elephant ears. The wider they are, the more able they are to, in animals, release heat. Well, with plants, the wider they are, the more able they are to soak up the sun's rays. So it's a little bit of the opposite. So what this plant is doing when it's curling up like this is it's giving itself its own shade. It's had a little bit too much sun, and so it's curling over and protecting itself a bit. So this is perfectly normal. There's nothing actually wrong with the plant. When you get a tomato plant from the nursery, if you're not growing it from seed, what you want to do is you want to bury the tomato plant's stem 1 to 2 inches higher than they already had it. And so these base leaves, these are going to get diseased anyway. You want them to go bye-bye. So you just pinch them off with your hands like that. And also try not to do overhead watering on your tomatoes. It really damages the leaves and stresses the plant out. Now tomatoes will grow if you have an indeterminate variety. There's determinate varieties and indeterminate varieties, and I'm not going to go into that today, but basically one will produce only so much fruit and within a given amount of time, and the other will keep on producing, and you can manipulate. When you have a fork, you can compare the two and which one's taller. The taller one is usually the more vigorous one. So here we have on this side, this is the tallest one. Also, this is the first one to put out flower stem. And right here, we have a flower stem. So this right here, this is basically a sucker that's gone on way too long. And I'm going to come back, since this is so thick, I'm going to come back with some shears and prune that. And I should have gotten to it a lot sooner than I did, but I've noticed it now. So now I'm going to have one single stalk up. This plant is now tall enough for me to secure it with string and tether it. I'd love to share with you information about the tomato hornworm. Now, this can be a pest in your garden that can devastate your tomatoes if you're not knowing what to look for and it gets out of control very easily. They're a hungry caterpillar. But if you do find a tomato hornworm, you will know that they're on your tomatoes if you're looking and you're seeing little dark pellets. That's their poo. So then you know one of them's on your tomato, look for it. You may see the poo before you see the devastation of the leaves. Now, as I've shown you, tomatoes thrive really well and will produce more, even though you're doing something that's not natural to them. They will produce more if they're pruned. So tomatoes naturally want to lay on the ground and they'll put in roots. You can see the fuzzies there on the stems. That gives the tomato plant the ability to put down roots. So it will lie low to the ground, and the tomatoes' plan is to self-propagate. The closer the tomatoes are to the soil, of course, the more bugs will get into them and everything, but the seeds will be scattered and it will be able to reproduce. And that's what it wants to do. So for us to enjoy the tomato, we have to do something that's unnatural to the tomato plant. Put it in a cage, prune it in a single row, and hold it up off of the soil. The tomato leaves do not do well at all if they're close to the ground. They get very diseased. So I will always prune those off, and you can see the bare branches there. So that really helps. And giving them regular water is also not such a great idea if you want good flavor to your tomatoes. If you give them too much water, if you baby them, your tomatoes will be very watery and flavorless. A little bit of stress to the plant. You don't want to hurt your plant, of course. You want it to be okay and still produce, not put it into shock. But a little bit of healthy stress to your plant helps it release its natural protection, which really adds a ton of flavor to your tomatoes. Why I bring up pruning your tomatoes is good for your tomatoes is if you find a tobacco hornworm on your tomato plant, you have a fantastic opportunity to observe this little creature and how its life cycle goes. It is pretty amazing, especially if you have children. This is really great. So get a 5-gallon paint bucket that's all emptied out and put about a 6-inch layer of soil at the bottom, and then feed your caterpillar fresh branches from your tomato plant that you're going to prune off anyway every single day. And it is amazing to watch them grow. They grow really quickly, and that way you're giving them what you were going to discard anyway. And what's really cute is at night, every night, they have their little suction cup feet. They will release the first suction cup feet, stick them together, and curl their head under, and it looks like they fell asleep saying their prayers. I think that's pretty adorable. So anyway, once your caterpillar is about the thickness of my thumb, it's going to be getting ready to make its chrysalis. And how these guys do it is underground, which is why the 6 inches of soil. Your caterpillar is going to burrow underground, and when it does, you want to leave that bucket undisturbed. It does not always come up in the same season. If your caterpillar goes under there really late in the year, it may not come out until next year. But midsummer like this, it's going to come out. And it comes out as it's commonly known as the sphinx moth. It is an awesome, huge, gray-brown moth. Just amazing. I also want to mention, put a screen lid on top of your bucket so that birds can't come in, because they will come and eat your caterpillar. Now, I heard something very interesting from a master gardener named George Brookbank. He was in Tucson, Arizona for the latter part of his career, and just an outstanding, fantastic gardener, worked from the Extension Garden Center there. And one thing that he said, and I don't know if it's true or not, I'm sure this guy who knows this stuff researched this before he said it, but he said that the sphinx moths are very sensitive to the lunar cycle. And it's around the full moon that they lay most of their eggs. So if you want to try this out, I have, and it's worked really well for me, is I take a white sheet and I cover up my tomatoes right in the evening around the time of the full moon, maybe those 3 days. And then the rest of the time I don't worry about it. So I put a little reminder in my calendar and I do that, and I haven't had any tomato hornworms out here, and my neighbors have. So maybe it works. Try it and tell me what you think. There is a method to my madness as to why my garden looks like a jungle. So let's take a peek and I'll show you what I mean. So right here, this is a massive beet that is no longer any good to harvest. I have harvested the others, and this one is going to seed, and I am going to get hundreds upon hundreds of seeds from this one beet. I really like this red variety. It's my favorite, and I want to save the seeds from it. I do seed saving every single year from the plants that I really truly enjoy. And there are different techniques for doing that, but it's usually pretty straightforward and easy. Here is the other reason why I let my garden become somewhat of a jungle, is I'm in the desert. And you can see here I've put a lot of hay on the ground to kind of hold in the moisture and provide some shade on the ground for these pepper plants and these strawberries. Because if I don't have that, they get really dried out and they die. They just don't have a chance. So what I'd like to do is have a cover crop. Now I do have a cover crop somewhere in here and it's completely buried now, but it was doing its job while it lasted. What I chose was sweet potato. You can get whichever variety you like from the store. I really like the purple ones. So even if I don't get any sweet potatoes from it, the leaves themselves are edible. Now you could do the same thing with potatoes, but you might accidentally pick some potato leaves and those are poisonous. So sweet potatoes are a win-win if you like. Sweet potatoes is a great cover crop. You can also, depending on your climate, do something like peanuts, which is a nitrogen fixer. So you get a double bang for the cover crop. So definitely look into cover crops. Make it something that you enjoy eating so that you get more than just one benefit from it. One of the reasons why we have so much crammed into one small garden, and you may look at this and think, that is not a small garden, it almost is the entire length of your backyard. It's small to us. When we moved in, we had 2 children, now we have 3, and they're growing and they're eating so much. And I wish I could say that this garden was enough to feed all of us, and it just isn't. So I put in as much variety as I can to give us as much good nutrition as possible from our own garden, but we definitely do need a lot more space. And my husband has built these out of pallets. I'm so grateful. I have grown so many things in them, and this was a lettuce forest. It's kind of like my own private salad bar, and I could come here and just pull off leaves and enjoy them with something like hummus or guacamole and just stand here and eat my lunch. And I have so many other little fun things in here, like chamomile and onions and a little squash and marigolds. And over here, this is looking kind of scraggly because of the heat, but I've got some carrots that are going into bloom. And of course, you saw the sunflowers up there. So a lot more in here than probably this bed could stand, but I just wanted to see what would happen. I put in so much good soil, and then before I put on the top layer of soil, I just scattered all the seeds that I really wanted to see, except for these were already growing, so I planted those, and I saw what came up. Because it's a fun experiment. Gardening is a fun experiment. So if you have success, yay, take note of that. My boys are pretending something Star Wars-ish. And if you have failures, take note of that. I knew when I put a tomato in here that I would get tiny little tomatoes and a tiny plant because the root system cannot grow through here. But that's okay. You either know what you're doing and you make that decision, or you find out what's going to happen just by fun. And I got this lettuce forest, and that was a lot of fun. So we're going to be here for several more months. I'm going to be able to see spring again in this garden, and then we're going to hand it off to some very fortunate person who loves gardening, who I hope will love it as much as we have and put into it and get back out great rewards. I'm not somebody with short timer syndrome, so this garden is going to be in full production whenever these new owners take over. So I want to bless them with wonderful plants, and since you never know what's going to happen from today or tomorrow, why not? We might be here longer or shorter than we plan on, and I don't want to not take care of my garden and hurt myself, and also not have something wonderful to pass on. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please do give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos coming out soon, and ring the bell to get notifications.